What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here. Back again, March the 11th. It is Tuesday. Conference tournaments are beginning for the high majors. We have the debuts of the Big 12 and the ACC, but that's not all. A lot of these conferences are also ending. We have championship games tonight in the CAA, the WCC, among others. We'll get into all of that. Before we get started, I want to thank anyone who subscribed to the channel. We crossed 500. We are halfway to 1,000 subs. So thank you if you've done that. Subscribing, leaving a comment, leaving a like, all that helps a lot more than you could ever really imagine. So thank you if you guys have done that. I appreciate it a lot. Let's dive right in because it's a busy slate. We're going to start up top with the marquee game in the West Coast Conference. St. Mary's Gonzaga will meet for the third time tonight. Gonzaga is a 3.5-point favorite. The total in the game is 137. There's no major injuries. St. Mary's took both of the regular season matchups in this series. They won 62-58 on the road. Very bad shooting game for Gonzaga. 17.5% from three. They committed 20 fouls, and believe it or not, Graham Ike wasn't a huge culprit, as he is wont to do. In the second game, St. Mary's won 74-67. Oh, and St. Mary's won on the boards. That's actually a place they won in both games. In that first game, they won 40-34. And then in the second game, when they were playing at home, they won 39-26, and they had 16 on the offensive glass. They won the foul margin. In the second game, I guess the improvement for Gonzaga was that they improved from three. They went from 17.5% to 28.5%. But St. Mary's still shot better in both games. I understand why Gonzaga is favored, but you have two head-to-head matchups with Gonzaga playing poorly, home and road. Now we're playing neutral. It's tough for me to see how this isn't closer to a pick-em. Resume-wise, Gonzaga is 0-4 against the top 25. Now, they're power rated extremely high across the board. This is a top 10 team. Really, anywhere you look for efficiency metrics, KenPom, Torvik, whatever. And I think the reason is they just beat the absolute snot out of really bad teams. They've lost to St. Mary's twice already. I mean, this team's best win is against Baylor at 29. That was early season Baylor, so a little different than what Baylor's put on the court now. Concerning losses outside the top 50, the worst of which was to Oregon State. So how much do you really buy into this team beating Pepperdine by 86 points and outcomes like that? That's why they're so high in power rankings, and I have a hard time reconciling that because I think this team is good. You just see the talent on the court. I think they're better than an 0-4 record against the top 25, but I also am not sure this team is like ninth in the country. St. Mary's is 2-0 against the top 25. Both of their wins were against this very Gonzaga team. How much you want to weight Gonzaga depends a lot, or I guess will influence a lot how you think about St. Mary's. This team has 4 losses outside the top 50, the worst of which was to Arizona State. That was a healthier Arizona State in non-conference, who's now dropped to 71st, but clearly a tale of two seasons for the Sun Devils. Outside of the Gonzaga wins, the best wins for St. Mary's are against Nebraska and USC. Both of those have aged poorly, but better additions of both of those teams played in the early part of the season. Stylistically, both teams are tall, top 88 in effective height, both awesome rebounding teams. St. Mary's is the #1 rebounding team in the country, which is how you get a team like Gonzaga on the other side who's 17, getting absolutely beat up on the glass in 2 straight games against the St. Mary's team. And on the offensive glass, too, St. Mary's is second in the country. That played a big role in both of their wins, especially the second one, where the rebounding gap extended a little bit wider than the first game. Neither team shoots many threes. They're outside the top 300, both of them, but Gonzaga's a little better there. And on the inside, Gonzaga's better scoring, but that's the teeth of St. Mary's defense, where they're 11th overall and 12th on the inside. So it's a bad stylistic matchup for Gonzaga scoring the ball. St. Mary's has a lot more offensive woes than Gonzaga. This team is 159th in effective field goal. For comparison, Gonzaga is 16th. You just run into the worst defense on the other side. So it's Gonzaga's the better scoring team. They're facing an elite St. Mary's defense. St. Mary's can be a little lackluster scoring the ball, but they're facing a lackluster Gonzaga defense, especially on the inside. So it's a very even matchup. St. Mary's is going to slow this game down as much as they possibly can. They're 359th in tempo. They're going to grease it up, play physical, win on the glass, and try to win via steals. drawing fouls, which they're good at both. I have a hard time believing that this should be a 3.5-point spread on a neutral court. We make this closer to about 2 points. I'm hesitating right now just because I think we see some Gonzaga money, to be honest with you. And I don't really see a reason to play this right away until we get some more information on the spread and the total. But we'll lean St. Mary's. We'll likely play this closer to tip-off. Before we move on, if you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. You must be 21 or older to play in most areas. Next up, let's go to the ACC, who begins their conference tournament today with a lot of the greasy teams. Most of the teams are greasy in this conference. 3-point spread in favor of FSU, and the total in the game is 152. Injury-wise, Syracuse's Donnie Freeman hasn't played since January. Elijah Moore's also been out. Florida State's Daquan Davis missed their last game. Good chance he returns, I think. These teams played on January 4th. Florida State won 90-74 at home. Syracuse shot the ball well from the perimeter, but they were really bad inside, only 47%, 1% field goal percentage inside the arc. Had a ton of fouls, committed a ton of turnovers, 15 to be exact, got crushed on the boards. That's how a lot of Syracuse games go, especially when they're at a height disadvantage. They are here. Syracuse is 2-16 against the top 100. Their best win came against Notre Dame at 93. They've won twice away from their building. That's including neutral matchups. So home neutral, neutral away games, they have 2 wins. And now they have 2 losses outside the top 100. They lost to Miami, who's 192 overall. Florida State's not a whole lot better, but they're definitely better. They're 5-9 against the top 100. Beat Pitt and SMU. Those are 2 top 60 teams. Syracuse doesn't have one in the top 90. They have 5 losses outside the top 100, but not very many towards that bottom end like Syracuse has. They just have 1 pretty questionable loss to Boston College. And we actually, so not to get ahead of ourselves, we make this within the 3. I'm just going to tell you right now, this is an IKB and I know better play. We are actually a little closer to 2.5. But we have evidence from the first game that Florida State can absolutely dominate this post matchup. And we see so much. There's a huge gap in some of the stylistics in this game. Height-wise, Florida State's 9th. Syracuse actually plays with the 85th tallest lineup, but they're 294th on interior defense, 294th. This was a huge factor in the first game. Every single interior player for Florida State just had themselves a day. Malik Ewan, 14 points, 7 boards. Even Taylor Bowen, 14 points, 10 boards, 3 blocks. Eddie Lampkin was in foul trouble, so that's never going to help. He fouled 4 times in 18 minutes, but that's live to happen again in this game. If Eddie Lampkin is off the floor for any length of time, it is just Florida State rinse and repeat straight to the glass, getting easy points right at the rim. So this is such a drastic stylistic matchup for me that I am sort of going against what the model says and leaning more into the efficiency gap between these 2 teams, especially on the inside. What's Syracuse's potential path to win if they do? I think, honestly, I don't really know because this team is 329th in 3-point rate. They don't shoot the ball well from 3 regardless, 198th in 3-point percentage. Florida State has a significantly better defense, over 100 spots ahead of them. They're over 200 spots in the interior, also, crazy enough, nearly 150 from the perimeter. Rebounding-wise, favor Syracuse, I suppose. But again, with the size that Florida State's putting on the floor, I don't think this is a situation you really want to mess with. Plus, Syracuse is 346th in turnovers committed. It's just a bad Syracuse team without their best player, Donnie Freeman, for like half the year. We'll take Florida State with a I know better play, and we'll see what happens. The Big 12 kicks off their tournament tonight. UCF taking on Utah. This is a 2-point spread in favor of Utah, 157 total. Couple injuries. Jordan Ivy Curry's been out for a bit for UCF. Jalen Sellers has been out for most of the year. I think there's a good chance Ivy Curry returns for this matchup. These teams played on February 23rd. UCF won 76-72. They were at home. Both teams shot the ball pretty poorly. UCF shot 25% from 3 and won a game. Utah had a bunch of weird stuff in the periphery. They turned it over 19 times. They committed 17 fouls. They got beat up on the glass 39-32, which was fairly neutral. But, I mean, you lose every single peripheral stat even with UCF shooting 25% from three. That's cause for losing a game. Utah's 2-6 against the top 25. They beat BYU and Kansas. They have 5 losses outside the top 50, the worst of which is to Oklahoma State. UCF has a comparable resume, 2-8 against the top 25, beat Texas Tech and Texas A&M. 6 losses outside the top 50 for them. They lost to Oklahoma State as well. So this is a pretty bad body of work for both teams. There's a few high points and a lot of low points. We took an over at 155.5. The big concerns here, this is played on a neutral court, so less familiarity, but pace is in our favor. UCF is 13th in pace. Utah is 89th. The other concern I would say is Utah has slowed their pace a bit since conference play started to 186th. UCF is not. They've jumped actually to 5th. So it is a pace-up spot for Utah. At the very least, I'm going to call them average in pace, and there's a good chance they're playing well above average as they have for most of the year. And secondly, the strength of both of these teams, especially UCF, comes offensively. They're 57th in total offensive efficiency. Utah, 71st. On defense, UCF's defense has been terrible this year. They're 122nd. They're constantly in track meets, in shootouts. They're a team that paces you up and won't defend. And plus, this team is 241st in interior defense. Utah 79th in interior scoring. They play the 8th tallest lineup in the country. They're equipped to exploit this UCF major weakness on defense. And on the other side, UCF is not the best scoring team. Utah's defense being outside the top 70 is helpful in this area. We'll see how this goes. Utah's definitely going to have to do a lot of the lifting in this game. They are the favorite, and we need an implied total somewhere in like the 75 to 77 range to get this over, which I think is live in this game. This is one that's come up a little bit, but pacing certainly in the favor of an over in this spot and one we will play. Next up, here we go. Conference USA, Florida International, Western Kentucky. This is an awesome game if you like Greece. Western Kentucky, 4.5-point favorite, total 143. FIU's Vianney Salachum has been out. Western Kentucky's Julius Stedford, same thing. These teams actually split the regular season with the home team winning each time, which is a miracle because FIU is the worst team in this conference by a mile. So FIU took that first game 85-66. They had a crazy outlier shooting performance. This team is normally horrible at scoring. They're one of the worst teams in the country offensively. But they were able to outshoot Western Kentucky significantly in that game. They actually won on the glass, too. They out-rebounded Western Kentucky 41-27. But in the second game, Western Kentucky got them back. They won 76-67. And this time, FIU shot more to their true shooting percentage, only 29% from three. They still out-rebounded Western Kentucky by a lot, 40-27. So that's concerning. But they also turned it over 16 times. It is what it is. This is just a bad FIU team. Western Kentucky, 2-4 against the top 100. They're 11-13 against the top 200. Their best win came over Lipscomb at 80. They have one loss outside the top 200, and that was to this very FIU team. FIU has 0 wins in the top 100, 0. And here's the real thing. 3-19 against the top 200. 3-19. Their best win, they beat Kennesaw somehow at 132. But outside of having a ton of losses, they have a loss to Howard at 3-11. So pretty bad body of work for FIU. It's just one of the high points just happens to be in this very matchup. Stylistically, I'm not really sure how much there is to say. This FIU team is 334th in offensive efficiency. They're 336 in effective field goal. They're outside the top 295 in every scoring metric. They can't score. They also can't take care of the ball. They're 326 in turnovers committed. They're also not that good on defense. They're 134th overall, but 261st inside, 205th from three. They do turn over teams a lot. They're 27th in turnovers forced, but that's not a problem for Western Kentucky. They're 60th in turnovers committed. This is one of the most secure teams with the ball offensively in the conference. So your one matchup advantage does not work in your favor in this game. Then on the Western Kentucky side, yeah, they have problems, but this team is basically a top 100 defense inside and out, facing the worst offense in the conference. They're 298th in effective field goal percentage, which is a big problem for me. But this FIU defense, for being 134th overall, They're outside the top 200 in 3-point and 2-point defense. Again, that metric is driven up by their turnovers force, which is not a problem in this game. Both teams middling in height, middling in rebounding, nothing really to see there. But man, this is a really bad FIU team with a poor body of work that doesn't really have a matchup advantage at all, whereas Western Kentucky has plenty. We play this at -4. The 4.5 is the current number. We make it outside of that, about 5.5. So this is one with quite a bit of value towards the Western Kentucky side and one we will play. Let's continue down this path, greasy path. Fairfield takes on Sacred Heart, 3.5-point spread in favor of Sacred Heart, a 144 total. Only injury in the game is to Michael Roken on Fairfield, not a major one. This is the opening round of the MAC, the double MAC, the MAAC. These teams played home and homes. Sacred Heart took both matchups. They won on the road 77-71, and then they won at home in blowout fashion 83-62. Fairfield's resume against the top 300, they are 6-18. Sacred Heart is 5-16. As far as good wins, Fairfield's best one came against Quinnipiac at 214. Sacred Heart beat Central Connecticut somehow at 177. We'll talk about them a little later. Both these teams have a loss outside the top 300. Fairfield dropped to Canisius at 359. Sacred Heart lost to Holy Cross at 318. We played a couple things in this game. First of all, one that's not shown on the screen that I want to just briefly touch on is the total. We played over 143, and largely that's because we've seen these teams both make a jump in pace, and Sacred Heart's playing already really fast, but they've gone from 48th to 21st since January 1st, and Fairfield's actually gone from 273 to 266. So that lines up in favor of an over, but from there, stylistically, I think we have an overplay as well. Sacred Heart can really score. When you actually break down these teams, it's basically a lot of metrics outside the top 300, really everywhere. And then the only metric that stands out for these two teams is Sacred Heart's 166 ranked offense. So right away, this Sacred Heart team can really score. They're 135th in effective field goal percentage. They're awesome at shooting threes. Fairfield is 311 at defending the three-point line. So that's going to be a major issue in this game. And then on the other side, Fairfield can shoot threes a little bit, not a lot, but Sacred Heart is 289th in three-point defense. So I'm hoping that's just enough with the pace in this game to push it over the top. All right, on the Sacred Heart side, ton of advantages. We mentioned offensively, they're infinitely better than Fairfield, but then they have some peripheral advantages. Despite being the shorter team, they're 325th in effective height. Fairfield's 169th. They have the rebounding advantage, 174 to 299. They attack the offensive glass, 134th there. Fairfield is 254th in defensive rebounding, so not great. Both these teams are good at shooting free throws, which is, I guess, positive. But you have such a wide gap in total offense that 3.5 points is not enough for me and not enough for our model. And as far as defensive efficiency goes, it's very close between these teams, but you actually have the slight edge Sacred Heart's direction. In total defense, interior defense, they're 84 spots ahead. And on the perimeter, they're about 30 spots ahead of Fairfield as well. So very interesting game with two head-to-heads. I was surprised to see this come in at 3.5. One we played towards the Sacred Heart side. All right, to the SWAC, we're going to talk about, I guess, the opening round of the SWAC. These are two bad teams in the SWAC too. But Prairie View A&M takes on Florida A&M. It is a 7-point spread in favor of Florida A&M, a 145 total. Injuries, Prairie View A&M's Tanaj Petway, Florida A&M's Caleb Washington, both have been missing time. Florida A&M won the first matchup these teams played, 78-67 on the road. Prairie View only shot 28.5% from three. Florida A&M won on the glass, 38-29. It's just a bad matchup, but Prairie View A&M is actually really bad. As far as resume goes, the SWAC is one of the worst conferences in the country. This is going to be a 16-seed conference. Whoever wins this conference will get one of those bad 16 seeds. Prairie View A&M has 5 wins all season. The best one is against Grambling State at 330. They have 5 losses outside the top 300. This team is one of the few wins that Arkansas Pine Bluff has. For reference, the worst team in the conference is Mississippi Valley or Missouri Valley. Excuse me on that. I forget which one it is. That's how bad they are. But Arkansas Pine Bluff is the second worst team. I believe it's Mississippi Valley State. That is the name of that team. Yes, sorry. Anyway, the second worst team, Arkansas Pine Bluff, They got a win over Prairie View A&M. Anyway, Florida A&M, they have 4 wins in the top 300. So much better resume. They beat Presbyterian at 232 on the high end. They only lost 2 games outside the top 300. Alabama A&M and Grambling State, somewhat respectable. But pacing in this game is very, very fast. And that's a lot of this conference. It's reckless, inefficient offense, but damn, is it fast. And if you can get over the bricks and maybe you feel like offensive rebounds, this is your conference. Anyway, Prairie View A&M is 43rd in tempo. They've remained pretty constant. They're 52nd since January 1st. Florida A&M is 181st in tempo, so immediately this sets up towards an over. And within the stylistics of this game, you have actually one decent offense in Florida A&M. This team is 195th in effective field goal, whereas Prairie A&M is 303. But Florida A&M is 77th in effective height, and that's a huge mismatch because Prairie View is 343. On the interior, Florida A&M is actually 181st, and then Prairie View A&M is 355th in interior defense. So just a massive mismatch on the inside for a game with this level of pacing. We should have some opportunities for offensive boards. That's the case in a lot of these games. And I guess if you were looking for a path for Prairie View A&M, they do force a lot of turnovers. They're 46th, and Florida A&M's 353 in turnovers committed. So maybe some points in transition for Prairie View A&M to get this over. But enough about the SWAC. Let's move to some other conferences. Nicholls takes on Lamar, a 1.5-point spread in favor of Lamar, a 143 total. This is the semifinal in the Southland, a conference that's generally dominated by McNeese, but it has surged forward. Used to be one of the worst conferences in the country. Now it's up to like 21st overall or something. Whoever faces McNeese out of this game, the winner of this game will play them, likely. That's not going to be the easiest game. Anyway, the semifinal of the Southland is here. Lamar had the double bye, so they haven't played yet. Nicholls did play. They beat Incarnate Word in their last game. It went into overtime. So that's worth mentioning here. We have a team that played yesterday in OT. So what does that mean? Lamar took both regular season matchups. They won 78-74 on the road. Then they won 65-53 at home. Nicholls is 3-10 against the top 200, but they do have a win over McNeese, so that's huge. They have 2 losses outside the top 200. Both of them were to Northwestern State. Lamar is 4-8 against the top 200. Their best win came over Corpus Christi. 4 losses outside the top 200, including some really bad ones, Alabama State and New Orleans. New Orleans at 350. So interestingly, the superior overall body of work goes to Lamar. However, they have more lows and Nicholls has more highs. But Lamar has the 2 head-to-heads. And then in efficiency metrics, we have this pretty decent gap in favor of Lamar. And I guess before we get there, Byron Ireland is still hurt for Nicholls. He tried to return in their last game, only made it 6 minutes. I don't know what we're going to get from him on the Nicholls side. That is a big decision, not to mention Nicholls playing more recently and Lamar off the super rest. I think you have some inherent advantages Lamar's direction before you even get into the efficiency. And first, Lamar has a significant defensive advantage, 114th to 193. They're much better inside, especially on the perimeter. Nicholls actually plays pretty decent defense themselves, but Lamar's much better at forcing turnovers overall than Nicholls, so you get the better overall defensive rating on the Lamar side. Scoring-wise, Nicholls comes in 163 in total offense. Lamar is at 246. However, the effective shooting gap is not that wide. Nicholls is 289th. Lamar is 304th. And I think Lamar could make some stylistic choices to narrow this gap. Lamar is 41st in three-point percentage. That's ahead of Nicholls at 103. However, Lamar is 330th in three-pointers attempted. Like, three-point rate is a stat that Lamar – this isn't like a important stat for the most part unless you have a gap like this. Like, why is Lamar shooting so few threes even though they're so good at it? Maybe it's a small sample trap and I'm reading too much into it. But this team can score when they choose to. Nicholls, 103 in three-point percentage. That's a solid rating for them as well. Turnovers, it's pretty even across the board. Nicholls doesn't turn it over much, but Lamar forces significantly more. Foul margin favors Lamar as well on the periphery. Lamar's a significantly taller team. On the glass, they have a severe advantage, 129th overall to 224th. It's a lot of little advantages for Lamar and this team coming off the mega rest. Ireland being injured for Nicholls, that's enough for me to play a 1.5. Even though our model has this inside, I left it at this just for reference to show you what it would look like with Ireland in the game. And, Nicholls not playing off short rest. So that's where we will lean in this contest. The Horizon has their final tonight, the Horizon League Championship. Youngstown State is a 3-point underdog to Robert Morris in a game with a 141 total. The only injury in the game is E.J. Farmer for Youngstown State. To get here, the number 4 seeded Youngstown State Penguins beat IPFW, who's 165th. That was a 5-point win, and they just knocked off Cleveland State by 2 at 167. So 2 of the better teams in this conference. Robert Morris, the number 1 seed of the Horizon, beat 222 Wright State by 21 points. And they just played Oakland at 180 to overtime and won by 3 points. These teams split the regular season with the away team winning both times. Horizon's weird like that. Youngstown State won the first matchup 72-58 on the road. Robert Morris shot poorly in that game. They hit 13.5% of their threes and only shot 68% from the free throw line. When you shoot like that, you're going to lose. Robert Morris took the second game by 2 points, 72-70. This time they outshot Youngstown State from 3. They won on the glass 36-29 in total rebounds. And somehow that was enough because they still committed 19 fouls and had 15 turnovers. But this team is just straight up better if you clean up some of that nonsense. And it's the Horizon. Sometimes you'll just get it. But overall, Youngstown State versus Robert Morris. Youngstown's the taller team at 120th. Robert Morris 235th in effective height. But rebounding is so wide here. Youngstown State at 245, Robert Morris at 44th. Gabe Dines, the center for Youngstown State at 7'2", is just not effective anywhere but defense. So, yeah, the gap is wide in height, but it's actually, I think, a rebounding advantage for Morris. Robert Morris has the offensive and defensive advantage. Effective field goal percentage, 160 to 237. 3-point percentage, 158 to 311. The only place where you could maybe argue Youngstown State has an advantage is on the inside. But Robert Morris is no slouch defending there. They're 125th, and I don't think Gabe Dines is very good. Turnovers forced, that favors Youngstown State, but the margin is actually pretty comparable. Foul margin definitely favors Robert Morris, which is weird that it didn't always play out like this because Robert Morris, 35th in fouls generated, Youngstown State, 269th in fouls committed. I don't think E.J. Farmer is going to play in this game. I'm seriously debating playing a Robert Morris, even though we don't make this anything wider than 3.1 in their favor. So it's very efficient in our opinion, mathematically. But man, the stylistics, they favor Robert Morris in most areas. What doesn't is that they played in overtime yesterday, so that is a concern. But this is one we're probably going to end up taking. This will be in Discord throughout the day. On the Discord, if you're interested, we play a lot of games ahead of time. There are plenty that have moved since the airing of this video. And we'll play some that lead up to tip as injuries break. Not a great news sport, so if you're paying attention, you can find edges late in the day as it breaks. We also have player props for all the major games and whatever small games for these conference tournaments, these championships. If the providers offer it, we'll project it. Points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals, minutes, everything you could possibly imagine in player props is available. And we'll have something for March Madness debuting that very, very soon. If you want access, no long-term commitments. It's $10 for a week, $30 for a month. The link is below. If you are interested, hope you check it out. All right. To the CAA final. The 12 seed Delaware has upset everyone to get here. Wilmington, the 2 seed, they also made it. It's an 8.5 point spread in favor of Wilmington, a 148.5 total. Only injury in the game, Wilmington's Josh Corbin's been out for a bit. Again, this is the championship, but Delaware has had to win 5 games in 5 straight days to get here. This will be their 5th, so they've actually won 4 in 4 days. But anyway, they beat Stony Brook, and imagine if this went the wrong way. They only beat Stony Brook by 4, the 332nd team in the country. Delaware won by 4 points. That's what started their run. After that, they beat 221 Campbell, 79-62. Knocked off a William and Mary team that wasn't exactly healthy, 100-78. And last night, they beat Towson, who's 153. They won 82-72. Great win for Delaware. Wilmington, they have only had to play 2 games so far because they were the 2 seed. They beat Hampton 79-65, and they just knocked off Charleston yesterday by 1 point, 68-67. In the regular season, Wilmington took both games 77-67 on the road and then 88-58 at home. Wilmington is 9-3 against the top 200. One of those losses came against Kansas. Delaware's 3-10 against the top 200. Their best win is against Yale. That's pretty good. Wilmington has 4 losses outside the top 200. Delaware has 9. Both teams have some bad bottom end stuff, so it's somewhat comparable there. But basically, the resume stuff, Wilmington's been much better up top. They have fewer lower end losses than Delaware. This is a game that's very hard to project if you just look at the efficiency metrics overall. Most of them favor Wilmington, especially on defense. Delaware is 333 in total defense. And man, this is bad really across the board. And Delaware is a little bit behind Wilmington in offense, 123 to 68. But the one thing you can say is this Delaware team can shoot, and when they get hot, they win games. That's what's happened in this tournament because this team is 36th in effective field goal percentage. Basically, what happens is they get into these track meets because they're 44th in pace. And if they're hitting their shots, maybe if they're hitting even outlier percentage of their shots, they have a chance to win games. They can't defend at all. They're horrible across the board on defense. And they play a small lineup too. They're 316th in effective height, 334th in rebounding. That's going to be a massive advantage for Wilmington, who's 23rd in rebounding. They're 26th in the offensive glass. Delaware doesn't have a rebounding stat in the top 300. But man, the path for Delaware is just remain hotter than the sun from 3, hotter than the sun from 2. Hit your free throws. They're great at that. And keep it more competitive. Wilmington is decent on defense. They're 186th. 185th on the inside, 187th from 3. That is not the best metric to look at. I mean, it is the best metric to look at. It's not the best. It doesn't give you the warm and fuzzies if you're backing Wilmington because, I mean, you'd like to see them play a little better defense if you're going to shut off the water for some of these 3-point attempts that Delaware has been smashing. We're not going to play it. Honestly, if you made me play it, it would be the over. And we actually show quite a bit of value on the over. But the reason I'm hesitating is you have Delaware playing their 5th game in a row, Wilmington playing their 3rd game in a row. Do these teams slow the pace at all? I don't have the answer for that. At least the last game for Wilmington was pretty slow, pretty down in terms of their scores. And we've seen it slow a little bit as well for this Delaware team. They did just come off 2 straight games, though. Basically, they've scored in every game, they've scored at least 79 points, and they scored 100 against William and Mary. Maybe we're looking too much into this, and the over should be something we take. We'll dive into that more off the stream, but that'll do it for us today. Actually, St. Francis and Central Connecticut didn't talk about this game, but that is the final in the NEC. St. Francis is the 3 seed, but they're outside the top 300. They're 317th overall. Central Connecticut, the heavy favorite to leave the NEC, is the representative for March Madness. They're 177th overall. And Central Connecticut actually beat St. Joe's this year. They got some good wins, some quality opponents on their resume. St. Francis doesn't. That should be a routing. But that's about it for important games tonight. We'll be back every day this week talking college basketball. Until next time, good luck, everyone. We will see you later.